Good morning, church family. Thank you for joining us for our online service today. I want to share a few announcements before we get started. The first announcement I want to share, I'm really excited. We have set a date for our next in-person gathering. And I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and I know many of you have as well. June 28th at 10 a.m., we will have our next in-person worship service. And there's going to be some things that are going to be different, and I just ask you to be patient with us and just keep in mind these are temporary restrictions in light of recent events. But in the coming weeks, the leadership's going to be deciding exactly what safety measures to put in place so that we can gather together safely. And so we're really looking forward to that and ask you to join us in praying along those lines. Second announcement is we're trying to get some things put together outside of our church building. The property has just kind of been neglected and needs some cleaning and some landscaping and things like that. And maybe you and your family would like to take on a project. Haley Atwater has actually put together a list of the projects needing done, and those are on our Facebook page. If you would check that out and maybe you want to take on one of those projects, would you just send an email to Haley and let her know? We'd really appreciate your help with that. One final announcement and also introduction to today's speaker is Chance Newingham. He's the Director of Partnerships for Hope Orphan Home in Sierra Leone, Africa. He's going to be preaching today, but many of you know him for his work with the orphanage in Africa. In fact, Chance and I were supposed to go there prior to all of the COVID-19 restrictions, and we're actually on standby, hoping to go there maybe sometime later this calendar year. And Chance has a real heart for preaching and a real gift at it, and so I know you'll be encouraged by his message, but I just wanted to remind you of who he is in case you don't know him, and he is one of our ministry partners. And if you'd like to know more about his ministry, you can just Google the ministry or visit our church website, and we have a link on there as well. So let's turn our hearts and minds toward worship now as we sing together along with Haley and Drew.
Please join us in singing Marvelous Light.
Good morning, church. I want to start out by telling you a story. I remember when I was a kid, every year on the 4th of July, we would go out on my grandpa's houseboat. There's one year in particular that I keep thinking about. So we got up that morning and we're getting ready, and we were going to be making our way to the marina, to the boat, but we learned that we needed to go to KFC and pick up the food for the day. And we went through the drive-thru and we picked up buckets and buckets of chicken and mashed potatoes and gravy and coleslaw and biscuits. It smelled so good. I remember sitting in the back seat of my dad's pickup truck and just taking it all in. And when you're a preteen kid, you're hungry all the time. So that's just a way of life. So we picked up the food and we're making our way to the boat. And once we got to the boat, I, like a preteen, selfishly announced, "Okay, I'm ready to eat." Well, it wasn't time to eat. I learned right then that we would not be eating for quite a while. We had to get the boat out, get it anchored, and then it was time to eat. I was appalled. I just could not fathom. We got the food. Why aren't we eating it now? So I went down in the bottom of the boat into the cabin to sulk in my own misery. And that was the best or the worst choice I ever could have made, because all the food was down there and I just continued to smell it. It was torture. It was literally like I was starving to death. At least that's what I thought at the time. And I realized at this moment I could really go for some KFC. So we waited for what seemed like hours, and it was quite a while. Well, my body felt like it was literally yearning for that food. Finally, we were anchored. And it was time to eat. And I'll tell you what, I tore into that KFC like nobody's business. I'm sure I looked like some wild, savage, ravenous animal whenever it was time to eat. Now, where am I going with all this? I want to make 2 points with this story. First off, I probably was not experiencing true hunger that day, okay? I was just hangry. You've heard that before, right? Hungry and angry, hangry. And the second point I want to make is this, and this point is more important than the first one by far. Those feelings of intense hunger that I experienced on that day, that 4th of July, I think can teach us something about our relationship with God. So go ahead and turn to Matthew chapter 5 in your Bible. Go ahead and open it up on your smartphone. We're going to be looking at one of the Beatitudes this morning. Specifically, we're looking at the 4th Beatitude, but it is the 6th verse. So Matthew chapter 5 verse 6 is where we're going to be today. Now, as a quick overview of the Beatitudes, I want to point out 2 things to you, okay? The first thing is this. I think it's helpful to think of the Beatitudes as if-then teachings from Jesus to his disciples, okay? They weren't teachings to the crowd. They were teachings to the disciples, and I think it's just really helpful to think of them as if-then statements. So think about the first 3 Beatitudes. I want to illustrate this if-then idea. So first one is this, in verse 3, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." So let's think about that as an if-then statement to the disciples. If you, my disciples, are poor in spirit, then the kingdom of heaven is yours. Look at the next beatitude. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. So let's switch it to if-then. If you, my disciples, mourn, then you will be comforted. Third beatitude then. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. If you, my disciples, are meek, then you will inherit the earth. I think it's helpful to think of them as if-then statements. Second thing I want you to consider is that the Beatitudes both demand and describe. They demand good character while also describing what the result will be of good character. So think about the second Beatitude. It says this, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." So what's the demand? We are to mourn our sin. Our sin should grieve us. That's what the Beatitude demands. What's it describe then? It describes what will happen for those people who mourn their sin. They will be comforted by God through forgiveness and healing. So, let's jump right into the 4th Beatitude. In verse 6, it says this, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." Now, I don't know what comes to mind for you when you think of blessed or blessed or being blessed. For me, I think of like being happy or receiving a good gift. I think of like a baby being born or life going favorably. And I think those are connections for what blessing can be. But here in this verse, I think the word is so much deeper than those things. Being blessed in the biblical sense, it is more than something that is temporary or circumstantial. I think being blessed is a state of being that only comes about when a person is in relationship with God and they experience His grace and His mercy. So, how do we get that blessing? Well, the rest of the verse tells us. Blessed are, here's how you get it, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. So I want to define those three words there, hunger and thirst, and then righteousness. And we'll put hunger and thirst together since they're so similar in this context. So hunger and thirst, those mean exactly what you think they mean. It's not complicated. That's when you're hungry and thirsty. It's when you're a preteen kid and you think you're starving and you want some KFC and some Mountain Dew. But what's super cool about this verse right here is that Jesus takes these basic human instincts and He turns them into a spiritual lesson. He was so good at this. Jesus was saying to His disciples, He's like, hey guys, listen, you know how you're really hungry and really thirsty sometimes? You know how your body like yearns for sustenance? That's how it should be with God. That's how you should feel when it comes to righteousness. Your deepest cravings should not be for Little Debbie's or Dr. Pepper or KFC, even though they didn't have those things back then. Jesus was saying your deepest cravings should not be for things like that. Your deepest cravings should be for righteousness. And that leads to the next question then. Okay, what is righteousness? Jesus, I'm tracking along with you. I am blessed if I hunger and thirst for righteousness, but tell me what righteousness is. Righteousness is goodness. Righteousness is holiness. Righteousness is moral uprightness. The simplest way that I can think of saying it is this. Righteousness is doing right. So, blessed are those people who hunger and thirst for doing right, for they will be filled. Now, I don't know about you, but I often find myself being hungry for and thirsting for what is unrighteousness. I find myself being hungry for and thirsting for things that I do not need or that I should not have. But here, Jesus tells me, my cravings are wrong. He tells me that my cravings need to be fundamentally changed. He tells me that my innermost passion needs to be a pursuit of Him. Why? Because He is truly the only righteous one. Because of our humanity, we are going to have this ongoing quest throughout our lives where we are hungry, and we will be faced with the decision, do I choose righteousness or unrighteousness? When we are thirsty, we will be faced with the decision, do I choose righteousness or unrighteousness? And we are told here, always and forever seek righteousness. And what's the result? The last part of the Beatitude tells us, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, here it is, for they will be filled. When we seek righteousness, we're going to be completely satisfied in this life and in the life to come. When we pursue righteousness, we are promised fulfillment. Now, this word filled here is kind of interesting. It means to be completely saturated. The way that I would illustrate it is like, imagine you've got a sponge that's dry and you squeeze it up as tight as you can, and then you put it in a sink full of water, and then you open it up underwater and it just absorbs as much as we can. That's what Jesus will do for us when we seek righteousness. For Jesus' disciples, when they heard Jesus use this word filled, for them it probably would have made connections to a domesticated animal living in a stall who had its food brought every day. All of its needs were met by a caretaker. That's probably what the disciples would have thought. So I was thinking about that on our little farm here. So we've got pigs and chickens and cats and baby kittens right now. None of our animals have to worry about food. I'm the one who goes to Farm and Home. I buy the big 50-pound bags. I load them in my truck. I take them home, put them in the barn, and then I scoop up their food and I go out and pour it in all the animals' bowls every day. They are completely dependent on me. As far as they're concerned, they have an endless supply of food. That's the way it is with Jesus. He's our farmer, He's our shepherd, and when we hunger and thirst for righteousness, He will always fill us up. Earlier I told you to be on the lookout for two things: if-then statements and then demand-describe statements. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Let's turn that into an if-then statement. If you, my people, hunger and thirst for righteousness, then you will be filled. What about demand-describe? I think this beatitude demands that we hunger and thirst for what is right. It's not optional. We are called to pursue righteousness. And then what happens? Well, that's the description. This is what it describes. The result of such a life is that we will be filled. Now, in an effort to give you something to grip onto, something to hold onto, I want to point out two different ways that we can today seek righteousness, how we can hunger and thirst for righteousness. This is your to-do list of sorts. First one is this: as believers, we must pursue personal righteousness. I tell my boys all the time, boys, you got to make good choices. Friends, we've got to make good choices. We've got to make good, God-honoring choices. I know that it is so hard at times. You can probably save yourself some money on your taxes by fudging the numbers a little bit, changing things around a little bit, but that's not pursuing righteousness. You can probably get out of an awkward conversation with somebody that you really don't want to have by lying, but that's not righteousness. We are called to more than that. And to find out what it means to live a life of righteousness, what it means to pursue righteousness, we've got to spend time in our Bibles. The entire Bible describes to us what a righteous life looks like. It's a letter to us from the only righteous one in all of existence. We need to read it. Furthermore, we need to surround ourselves with other people who are seeking to live righteously, because that will be an encouragement to us as we seek to live righteously, and it'll also help hold us accountable for those times when we are not living righteously. Pursue personal righteousness. If you do it, you will be filled. Second thing is this: pursue justice for those who have experienced injustice. This word righteousness here actually has connections with justice and bringing justice. Think about it, okay? Because the world that we live in is corrupted by sin, tragedy after tragedy occurs. And when that happens, are we to just sit idly by and say, well, shucks, that really stinks. I hope that doesn't happen again? No, that's not to be our response. Because we represent a just God in an unjust world, it is our job to bring justice whenever we can. There are so many things going on in our world right now where this truth is applicable. Our society, in some places, is on the brink of collapse. Why? Because racism is alive and well today. Did you know that in the past 2 months over quarantine, the number of incidents of child abuse have risen dramatically? Just in the past few days, innocent people have lost their businesses because of others' selfish choices. Can we fix all of these things? Do we have a solution that just changes everything? No. But we can seek justice for those around us. We can seek justice for those people whose lives overlap with ours. When we do this, Jesus promises that we will be filled. May we be people who pursue personal righteousness. And may we be people who pursue justice for the oppressed. When we do this, Jesus promises that we will be filled. God, I pray that you would help every one of us to pursue righteousness at all costs. I pray that just as our body daily hungers for food and thirsts for drink, that we would hunger and thirst for what is right. that when given the option to pursue unrighteousness and righteousness, that we would, through the power of your Spirit, pursue righteousness. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Well, friends, thank you for joining us for our online service. We really appreciate your continued support and partnership with our ministry. Hope you all have a great week.